Okay, good morning. Our topic for today is endocrine disorders in pregnancy. We are going to limit it to two disorders in pregnancy: hyperthyroidism, hypothyroidism, and diabetes in pregnancy. This will be our learning objectives for thyroid disorders. First, we have to describe the thyroid physiology when your patient is pregnant, establish the diagnosis of hyper and hypothyroidism, recognize what are the signs and symptoms if your patient is in thyroid storm. We have to formulate the management plan of hyper and hypothyroidism and enumerate the fetal and neonatal effects of hyper and hypothyroidism. For the learning objectives in diabetes mellitus in pregnancy, you have to know the classification of diabetes mellitus, differentiate pre-gestational or overt diabetes from gestational diabetes mellitus, understand why pregnancy is diabetogenic, recognize diabetes in pregnancy, enumerate the fetal and neonatal complications, and we will formulate a management plan of DM in pregnancy. So we'll start first with thyroid disorders in pregnancy. Let us review the thyroid physiology, wherein there are three glands that are involved, or three parts involved: the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and the thyroid tissues. We all know that the hypothalamus stimulates the pituitary gland by releasing the thyroid-releasing hormone. And in response, the pituitary gland will release your thyroid-stimulating hormone, stimulating the thyroid gland to produce T4 and T3. Now, most of the T4 and T3 are bounded to the thyroid binding proteins produced by the liver. Thus, most of the thyroid hormones are bounded to your TBG. And what will be the important hormones that will affect the neonates and the mother will be the free hormones in the circulation. Now, during pregnancy, there are several changes that occurred, and most of our patients will present with moderate enlargement of the thyroid gland. 50% of your patient will have an enlarged thyroid gland during pregnancy, and this is secondary to the hyperplasia and increased vascularity of the thyroid gland. Now, there are factors affecting the thyroid function during pregnancy. First will be the human chorionic gonadotropin, which is produced early on in pregnancy, the urinary iodide excretion by the kidneys, and the thyroid binding globulins produced by the liver. What will be the effects of your human chorionic gonadotropin? So early in pregnancy, HCG has a mild thyrotropic activity. So during the first trimester, it is the HCG that stimulates T4 secretion being produced by the maternal thyroid tissues. Why is it that you have to produce this T4? Because it is important for the brain development of the fetus. As a result, if you have high amount of your thyroxine, this will produce a negative feedback, which will cause a decrease in your TSH. Now, thyroid function during pregnancy is also affected by the increased thyroid binding globulins produced by the liver. As I have told you before, most of the thyroid hormones produced during pregnancy are bounded to your TBG. Actually, your TSH does not cross the placenta. So during the first trimester, the low TSH, again, is secondary to the HCG, which stimulates the thyroid hormone secretion, causing negative feedback. to your thyroid gland, thus decreasing the TSH. In contrast to your TSH, which does not cross the placenta, the maternal thyroxine is transferred to the fetus throughout pregnancy. Another factor that will affect the thyroid gland will be the increased glomerular filtration rate when your patient is pregnant. So, because of the increased glomerular filtration rate, the thyroid gland will try to compensate by increasing plasma uptake of iodine. And this increased plasma uptake of iodine is a compensatory mechanism of the thyroid tissues in order to maintain a euthyroid state. Because of the increased renal clearance in pregnancy, during pregnancy, it is recommended that you have to increase the iodine intake to at least 250 micrograms per day, in contrast to a non-pregnant patient who is only required 100 to 150 micrograms per day. Thus, iodine deficiency during pregnancy can lead to hypothyroidism and goiter. The third factor affecting the thyroid tissues will be your thyroid binding globulin. This increases 2 to 3-fold. Again, to emphasize that this is produced by the liver, and it has a high affinity to thyroid hormones and responsible for majority of transport of your T4, amounting to 68%, and T3, which will account for 80%. The mechanism for the increased TBG is secondary to the increased hepatic synthesis of TBG due to your estrogen, which is produced during pregnancy. Now, you have an increased total albumin, you have an increased thyroid binding globulin, most of the thyroid hormones are bounded, so you have an increased thyroxine and increased T4. So, in order to really determine whether your patient has thyroid problems during pregnancy, what you should request in a patient will be the TSH, the free T4, and free T3. Thyroid hormone is very important in the development of the fetal brain and mental function of the baby because there is an intimate relationship between the maternal and fetal thyroid function. Maternal T4 is transferred to the fetus, and it is important for brain development. How about the fetal thyroid? It will only begin synthesizing the hormone only after 12 weeks of pregnancy. So the mother really play an important role in the early part of pregnancy with regards to the production of T4, which is necessary for the brain development of the fetus. Drugs that will affect the maternal thyroid also affect the thyroid gland of the fetus. Thus, if the mother is receiving anti-thyroid hormone, your baby might be having hypothyroidism or might develop hypothyroidism. Now, what are the diagnostic signs or how will you diagnose if your patient has hyperthyroidism or thyrotoxicosis? Similar to a non-pregnant patient, the manifestation will be the same. Your patient will present with tachycardia, elevated sleeping pulse rate, thyromegaly, exophthalmos, failure to gain weight. And when you request for your thyroid function test, the result will be an increased free T4, increased free T3, and markedly low TSH. There are some cases wherein the TSH is low and your free T4 is still normal. And the diagnosis in these cases will be a subclinical hyperthyroidism. Hyperthyroidism is secondary to the Graves' disease. It is an autoimmune process associated with the presence of your thyroid-stimulating antibodies. And this will be important in stimulating the thyroid gland to produce thyroid hormones. And this will usually decline during pregnancy, leading to chemical remission in many women. How are we going to manage hyperthyroidism? This is by giving anti-thyroid drugs or surgery. But please remember that radioactive iodine is definitely contraindicated during pregnancy. What are the thionamide drugs that are available? And the mechanism, it inhibits the thyroid hormone synthesis by blocking iodination of the thyroxine or tyrosine molecule. Thyrotoxicosis during pregnancy can always be controlled by these thionamide drugs. There are two available, your profil-thiouracil and your methimazole. But there is no evidence that one or the other has a clear therapeutic advantages over the other. However, most of us will prefer profil-thiouracil, and the reason for this is because it partially inhibits the conversion of your T4 to T3, and it crosses the placenta less readily than methimazole. And please remember that methimazole is contraindicated in the first trimester of pregnancy. Now, when your patient has already a controlled thyroid hormones and it is already beyond first trimester of pregnancy, you can shift your propylthiouracil to methimazole. Now, looking at these different drugs, comparing profil-thiouracil and methimazole, if you will look at the side effects, during the first trimester of pregnancy, if you give methimazole, the baby will develop hypothyroidism, choanal atresia, and aplasia cutis. Thus, it is recommended that methimazole should be given during the second trimester onwards. How about PTU? What will be the side effects? It can cause skin rash, agranulocytosis, and hepatitis on the mother. Other drugs that can be given to thyrotoxicosis will be your propranolol. Propranolol is used to control tachycardia, but it is not free of complications. It is related to IUGR, respiratory distress, bradycardia, hypoglycemia, and hypothermia. Now, I do not expect you to remember the doses anymore. You just remember the effects and complications if given during pregnancy. How about surgery? Now, surgery during pregnancy or thyroidectomy during pregnancy is not recommended because it is associated with miscarriage, hypoparathyroidism, laryngeal nerve paralysis, and usually if you do surgery during pregnancy, it will cause severe bleeding. So it is seldom done. Now, how about ablation? With radioactive iodine, it is contraindicated during pregnancy because it is teratogenic. Now, how about the outcome of a patient with hyperthyroidism? Usually, it depends on whether you were able to control metabolically the hyperthyroidism of your patient, because excess thyroxine may cause miscarriage. Among untreated women, it is also observed that there is an increased incidence of preeclampsia, heart failure, and adverse perinatal outcome. Now, these are the complications to the fetus. The fetus on delivery might develop goitrous thyrotoxicosis because the thyroid-stimulating antibodies can enter into the circulation and affect the fetus, causing hydrops and fetal demise. So the treatment for your patient is the maternal administration of thionamide drugs. Some fetus will also develop goitrous hypothyroidism if the mother was given maternally administered thionamides. The baby will develop hypothyroidism, so with goiter. If the mother was not given medications during pregnancy, one of the dreaded complications of thyrotoxicosis in pregnancy is thyroid storm and heart failure. And what is thyroid storm? It is an acute, life-threatening hypermetabolic state. And your patient will have heart failure due to cardiomyopathy. And these are the manifestations of your patient. She will consult you because of fever, marked tachycardia, severe dehydration, precipitating factors like labor, cesarean section, and infection, and there is around 25% mortality rate despite of aggressive, appropriate medical management. So how are we going to treat thyroid storm and heart failure? The same as in hyperthyroidism. You have to give your propyl thiouracil. You can give the iodide. It can be in the form of an oral or an IV iodide, lithium carbonate, dexamethasone, and beta blocker to control tachycardia. This was already lectured to you in your clinical pharmacology. So we will not discuss this further on, but at least you have to know the drugs that are given in hyperthyroidism. Again, to inhibit the production of new hormone, you use your thionamides. Inhibition of hormone release, you have your iodide, potassium iodide, and lithium carbonate. Inhibition of T4 to T3 conversion, you have your PTU, corticosteroids, beta-adrenergic blockade, and propanolol. You have your anti-adrenergic agents, and you have plasmapheresis or plasma perfusion for the removal of excess circulating hormones. Now let's go to the next, which is the other end, which is your hypothyroidism. We seldom see patients with hypothyroidism during pregnancy. Why? Because most of them are infertile. Why are they infertile? Because hypothyroidism is related to anovulation. So if they are not ovulating, they will not get pregnant. If ever they get pregnant, they have a high incidence of developing preeclampsia, abruptio placenta, low birth weight, and stillborn infants. What will be the cause of hypothyroidism during pregnancy? This is secondary to the formation of your anti-thyroid peroxidase antibodies, as seen in Hashimoto's thyroiditis. And when you request for your thyroid function test, your hormones, of course, will be low. So you have a low free T3, low free T4, and your TSH will be elevated. There are some cases wherein the TSH is elevated, and yet your free T4 and free T3 are still normal. And the diagnosis in these cases will be your subclinical hypothyroidism. Now, what will be the effects of hypothyroidism in fetus and infants. As we have discussed before, in the early part of pregnancy, your thyroxine is important in the development of the brain. So if your mother is hypothyroid, the baby will present with impaired fetal neuropsychological development and impaired psychomotor development. So the effects will be on the brain of the baby. So how are we going to manage? The management is to give thyroxine replacement therapy at 50 to 100 micrograms daily. And if it is secondary to iodine deficiency, you have to give 250 micrograms per day of iodine. In mild iodine deficiency, the baby will usually present with intellectual impairment. If it is severe, your baby will present with endemic retinism. This is a picture of a baby with endemic retinism. If you can see, the tongue is quite big and protruding out of the mouth. This is congenital hypothyroidism. Thus, at present, it is part of the newborn screening. Because if you found out that the baby has congenital hypothyroidism, you have to replace thyroxine so that this baby will develop normally. Now, we will go to the next endocrine disorder in pregnancy, and this is diabetes mellitus. This is a common problem during pregnancy. So we have to classify what are the classification of diabetes. We have the so-called pregestational diabetes, the type 1 and type 2. This is the same as your diabetes in a non-pregnant patient. Type 1 diabetes is an absolute insulin deficiency. It results from beta cell destruction. Type 2 diabetes naman is due to inadequate insulin secretion, or you have an increased insulin resistance. You have the normal amount of insulin, but the periphery is resistant to it. Now, the second will be your gestational diabetes. Gestational diabetes is the diabetes diagnosed when your patient gets pregnant. And that is not the so-called overt type. The overt diabetes or pregestational diabetes will be your type 1 and type 2. So let us study pregestational diabetes or overt diabetes. This will be our threshold. If you will request for a fasting plasma glucose, and you get a value of 126 milligrams per DL, or hemoglobin A1C of at least 6.5, or a random plasma glucose of at least 200 milligrams per DL, you can give a diagnosis of overt or pregestational diabetes. Regardless of the tentative diagnosis of overt DM based on this threshold should be confirmed. So what are the neonatal and fetal effects of overt diabetes? These are the complications. They are high risk for abortions, preterm delivery, malformations. Look at this picture. You can see that the legs are short. The baby has imperforate anus, and the typical diabetic baby who are plump, altered fetal growth. Look at this baby. The baby is quite big. Probably this baby weighed 10 pounds. And what will be the complication if the baby is too big or macrosomic? This is shoulder dystocia. You can deliver the head, but you cannot deliver the body. Worse will be an unexplained fetal demise. Most diabetic mothers will have problems of having fetal demise prior to their delivery because of fetal hypoxia, because the glucose is competing with the oxygen that should be delivered to the baby. Another will be hydramnios, or too much amniotic fluid. When the baby is delivered, these are the complications. Baby will be hypoglycemic. That is the reason why they will advocate early feeding if the mother has diabetes. Hypocalcemia, hyperbilirubinemia, cardiomyopathy, cognitive development, and the baby may inherit diabetes mellitus. How about the mother? What will be the effects of overt diabetes to the mother? So if you have a pregnant patient with overt diabetes, they are high risk for preeclampsia or hypertension, nephropathy, retinopathy, neuropathy, ketoacidosis, and infection. So how are we going to manage if we have a patient with overt diabetes? Before getting pregnant, the American Diabetes Association has proposed that before you advise your patient to get pregnant, if she has overt diabetes, the level of the fasting blood sugar should be at least 70 to 100 milligrams per deciliter. And the postprandial values, 1 hour, should be less than 140 milligrams per dl, and 2 hours postprandial should be less than 120 respectively. So you have to satisfy these criteria before you will advise your patient with overt DM to get pregnant. Another is by requesting for hemoglobin A1C. Hemoglobin A1C should be less than 7 in order to avoid the congenital malformation associated with overt DM. So let's say you advise your patient to get pregnant. First trimester, you're giving her insulin. And then after you give her insulin, you have to ask her to monitor her blood sugar, capillary blood glucose level. And what will be your target values in order to determine if your patient has controlled sugar level? The fasting level should be less than or equal to 95. First hour should be less than or equal to 140. Or 2-hour postprandial should be less than or equal to 120. Or hemoglobin A1C of less than or equal to 6. If you are not able to attain the desired glucose level, you can adjust the insulin. Next is diet. Do not forget to advise your patient on the proper diet for diabetes. Second trimester, what are you going to do with your patient? You have to request for alpha-fetoprotein. And if your alpha-fetoprotein is elevated, you have to request for ultrasound. Because as I have mentioned before, overt DM is related to congenital anomalies. Thus, targeted ultrasound scan should be requested during the second trimester. You also have to request for fetal 2D echo. in order to determine any cardiac anomaly in this particular baby. Third trimester, what are we going to do with our pregnant patient? You have to do your surveillance testing. Monitor the fetus. Because as I have mentioned, one of the complications of our diabetes during pregnancy is fetal demise. You do not want to receive a patient with a fetal death in utero. And what are those antenatal surveillance that you remember? We have our biophysical scoring, non-stress tests. We have our Doppler. If you are considering intrauterine growth restriction, you can advise your mother to do fetal kick count. And then later on, you can either induce labor or do cesarean section if there are obstetrical indications. So we will now proceed with gestational diabetes mellitus. These are the patients with no history of diabetes prior to pregnancy, and they just get pregnant, and they just develop diabetes when they are pregnant. So why is pregnancy potentially diabetogenic? We all know that during pregnancy, you have a mild fasting hypoglycemia, a postprandial hyperglycemia, and hyperinsulinemia. In healthy pregnant women, the fasting plasma glucose concentration falls somewhat possibly due to increased plasma levels of insulin. And there is a peripheral or reduced peripheral uptake of glucose due to the insulin resistance brought about by pregnancy. And what are the reasons for this increased peripheral or increased peripheral resistance to insulin? The hormones of pregnancy are the culprits: progesterone, estrogen, and the human chorionic somatomamotropin or human placental lactogen. These are all the hormones that will be responsible for the formation of gestational DM. So how are we going to screen our patient? As recommended by the WHO, for Filipino gravidas, universal screening for GDM is recommended when during the first prenatal care. The Asia-Pacific region is pandemic or epidemic with regards to the occurrence of diabetes mellitus. And what is the reason why Asians or Filipinos are high risk for the development of diabetes mellitus? Because the Filipinos are fond of eating rice, just like any Asian countries. So when are we going to screen? Based on WHO, for Filipinos, we have to screen at the first prenatal care. But based on Williams, the screening is at 24 to 28 weeks because Williams is an American textbook and they are not considered high risk for GDM. Thus, in Williams, the recommendation for the screening of gestational diabetes is at 24 to 28 weeks gestation. So how are we going to screen? The screening recommended by Williams is 50-gram oral glucose challenge test, wherein your patient will be asked to take 50 grams of glucose, and then you have to take the sugar level 1 hour after. And if it is between 130 to 140 milligrams per DL, you will proceed with 100-gram oral glucose tolerance test. So the value or cutoff is 130 to 140 before you do 100 grams oral glucose tolerance test. Here you have an 8-hour fasting. Your patient will be given 100 grams of glucose and they will get the blood sugar 1 hour, 2nd hour, and 3rd hour. So all in all, you will have 4 values. And there are 2 recommendations with regards to abnormal values. One is by Carpenter and the other one is by the National Diabetes Plasma Data Group. If 2 of the 4 values are elevated, you can diagnose your patient to be having gestational DM. So, for high-risk patients, just like Filipinos, you have to screen as soon as feasible. And who are the other patients considered high risk? Those who are obese, those with family history of type 2 DM, previous history of gestational diabetes mellitus, IgM or glucosuria. If GDM is not diagnosed at this time, you can repeat the test at 24 to 28 weeks. Or if the test is still normal at 24 to 28 weeks. But later on in pregnancy, you see signs and symptoms of hyperglycemia like a large baby or polyhydramnios, you can still repeat the test. What will be the maternal effects of GDM? Your patient is high risk for preeclampsia or eclampsia, increased risk for infection, bacterial infection, macrosomic fetus, which will result in difficult delivery or birth canal injuries. Patient is high risk for hydramnios, so your patient might have cardiorespiratory symptoms and increased maternal mortality due to associated hypertension, infection, and cesarean section. How about fetal anomalies? Just like in overt DM, it is not substantially increased with regards to gestational DM. But you have a higher incidence of macrosomic babies. Elevated fasting glucose of more than 105 milligrams per deciliter has been associated with unexplained stillbirth, similar to overt diabetes. So, how are we going to manage our patient? Antepartum. So, during pregnancy, you have to advise proper nutrition, weight management, lifestyle changes. So, avoid alcohol, avoid smoking, and then you monitor the blood glucose. And the target will be the same, no? Wherein our preprandial or fasting should be less than or equal to 95. First hour, less than or equal to 140, and second hour is less than or equal to 120. This will be our targets after we advise your patient for adequate or correct nutrition. But if your patient is not responding to your diet and exercise, you can give your pharmacologic management in the form of insulin, which is the proven treatment for a long time. Now, in our new 25th edition of Williams Obstetrics, there are 2 oral hypoglycemics that are now being advocated, your glyburide and metformin. This can also be used during pregnancy. How about surveillance? How are we going to do our surveillance of the fetus? First, you have to advise your patient to count fetal movement. You can do your NST or non-stress test. You can request for ultrasound to monitor the growth, do biophysical scanning or biophysical scoring, congenital scan, and Doppler studies if you are considering IUGR. So preconception, you should advise your patient on the maternal glycemic control. And then if she gets pregnant, you have to have an initial ultrasound at 6 to 11 weeks, measure the crown rump length. At 16 weeks, you again repeat the ultrasound for growth monitoring. At 20 to 24 weeks, you can request for congenital anomaly scan or fetal echo. At 28 weeks, you now advise your patient fetal movement counting. So how are we going to instruct our patient on how to count the fetal movement at home? First, it should be done every night. Movement may be a kick, a twist, or a roll. Start counting anytime when the baby is active. Count the baby movements, preferably when you are lying on your left. And then you mark the fetal movement. You should have at least 10 fetal movements in 2 hours. And if your patient does not feel 10 fetal movements in 2 hours, she should consult the obstetrician. Then do not wait until tomorrow. So after you instruct fetal movement counting, these are the other monitoring for our patients with gestational DM. You can do the ultrasound for growth monitoring and biometry every 2 weeks. Request for full BPS twice per week if your patient is on insulin or comorbids. For example, she is hypertensive. If the patient has a good glucose control, you can request for the BPS only weekly or every 2 weeks. Now, how are we going to deliver the baby? The timing of delivery should be individualized depending on how you control the blood sugar, whether the patient has associated fetal complications or maternal complications. For patients on insulin and with controlled blood sugar, the labor is induced at 38 weeks. If the patient is on insulin, but the blood sugar is still uncontrolled, it should be induced at 37 weeks. So again, let us repeat. If your patient is on insulin with uncontrolled sugar, the termination of pregnancy should be at 37 weeks. But if the sugar are controlled and your patient is on insulin, you can induce labor at 38 weeks. How about if your patient is on diet? A patient on diet with a controlled blood sugar, you can still await for spontaneous labor until 40 weeks. And if still undelivered, you will induce it thereafter. If your patient is for elective cesarean section with GDM and on diet, the recommended elective cesarean section should be done at 39 weeks. So, you have to deliver the patient before 39 weeks only if there are maternal and fetal indications if your patient is on diet. GDM is not itself an indication for CS, so we don't do CS just because our patient has gestational DM. And if vaginal delivery is attempted, you have to hook the baby to electronic fetal monitor so you can monitor the fetal condition intrapartum. If CS is elective, this should be carried out early in the morning to avoid prolonged fasting. How about postpartum? What are you going to do? All women with GDM or overt DM during pregnancy should be screened for type 2 diabetes using 75 grams oral glucose tolerance test after 6 to 12 weeks postpartum. So you have to follow up all patients with GDM or the so-called DM during pregnancy 6 to 12 weeks postpartum because we want to follow up our patient if she has GDM or she has overt DM. So, fasting of less than 100, second hour of less than 140, hemoglobin A1C of less than 5.7 will mean that your patient is normal. But if she belongs to 100 to 125, more than 140 to 199, second R, hemoglobin A1C of 5.7 to 6.4, it is diagnosed as IGT. But if it is more than 126, more than or equal to 200 for second R, and more than or equal to 6.5, you can diagnose her as overt DM. Breastfeeding. It is recommended that all women with GDM should be encouraged for breastfeeding. And what will be the benefits? It will decrease postpartum maternal glucose values, and there is a lower incidence of type 2 DM and metabolic syndrome among breastfed children. How about contraception? What contraceptive methods will you advise for patients with diabetes? Barrier, IUD, OCP, POP or progestin-only contraceptives, DMPA, sterilization, including copper and levonorgestrel releasing IUDs, can be safely given in patients with prior gestational diabetes mellitus. And that ends our lecture. Thank you, and thank you very much for listening.